All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Today is April 25th, 2023. Welcome to the Great Falls International Airport Authority Board meeting. As a reminder, the mission of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to optimize transportation services and development in our region, and the vision of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to maximize the airport's benefit to our region. Welcome to the public. Thank you guys for being here. We do encourage your participation. If you do have anything to say at any time, please feel free to speak up. Stand and identify yourselves, even though we generally know who you are. We'd love to hear from you. We'll go ahead and start with a roll call. Commissioner Eritz. Here. Commissioner Gibbs. Here. Commissioner Hogan.
Here.
Commissioner Husted. Here. Commissioner Lalonde is here. Commissioner Thompson.
Here.
And Commissioner Timbo is absent. Perfect. With the quorum of the board present, I'll call the meeting to order. Start with the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll start with the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. This month, we have item A, approval of board meeting minutes and finance committee meeting minutes for March 2023. Item B, payroll checks for March totaling $165,646.76. Item C, maintenance and operations checks number 27404 to 27455 totaling $593,002.28. Item D, approve passenger facility charge totaling $60,947.37 for March 2023. And item E, financial reports for March 2023. Does any board member have an item they would like to hold for further discussion or vote? Perfect. I get a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Got a motion for further discussion? And a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And nay. The ayes have it. On to the director's report.
Yes, thanks. Lots of exciting things to talk about this month. Just drawing your attention to the profit and loss reports. Revenue is doing exceedingly well as we approach the final quarter of the year. We're above in most categories, looking like it's going to be a solid revenue year. Likely it'll still be below 2022. You remember we have about $500,000 in one-time revenue from the FedEx lease. We defeased the debt on that FedEx lease early a couple of years ago, and then we were benefiting from that additional revenue coming in, and at the closeout of the lease, it was all additional revenue the last year. So we have a one-time increase in the amount of revenue from them, about $500,000. That got us to that almost $5.5 million in revenue last year. So this year we'll probably be below that by about $500,000, but looks like we're finishing up a very solid year on the revenue front. Looks as though we're in a position to cross $1 million in parking revenue for the very first time. If we have a decent April, which it looks like we've had, and then a fair May and June, which are typically not that strong parking months, we should easily hit $1 million in parking revenue, which is really exciting. As we take advantage of operating that parking lot ourselves, this will be our, even though we're not at record passenger levels, be a record revenue year for us. So that's pretty exciting. On the expense side, you can see we're right now at about 103% of budget through the first 3 quarters of the year. Obviously coming in a little hot. I expect that's actually going to get worse. As I've been reporting, we're ending our relationship with our janitorial company. Some irreconcilable differences, we'll call them, the last couple of months, and I expect we'll probably pay more for janitorial going forward. We may ultimately end up hiring internal staff We're looking at that as a real possibility. We think we can, given the way prices have gone up, we can pretty much do it for a similar price, if not cheaper, than some of the proposals we've gotten. It's just very hard for those companies right now to make a profit and keep employees. We actually think we might be a little better at that because we're a little better in terms of benefits and that type of long-term employee interest stuff. So we're looking at that as a possibility. We'll be making those decisions over the next week or so, trying to put a new janitorial
Full-time positions?
They would be, yeah. We probably need about 3 of them. But our janitorial, I think by the end of the year, we probably will have paid about $180,000 in janitorial already. So it's really not that far off from having our own FTEs. So we're looking at all those things right now. I do suspect we may have to come back to the board with a budget amendment either in May or in June as we get to the end of the year. As you recall, we only approve a specific amount of budget. Many years ago, we used to pad that sum for additional snowstorms and extra overtime and bringing in temps. But we, most of the time, don't need that. And I hate the idea of budgeting money you probably won't need. So we, in discussion with the board, I think 10 years ago, we made the determination then that we would budget to a normal winter and then come back to the board for variances if we had an extraordinary winter. This year, we've used plenty of overtime and temp staff to get us through the winter, and so we're a little hot on those salary categories. And so we may have to come back to the board next couple of months for a little bit more money. It's not extraordinary. I mean, we're talking 3-5%, somewhere in that range. But something we may have to do. We don't want to exceed our authorization, so just something to be aware of. Any questions on that?
You were looking at that automated
Floor scrubber?
sweeper.
Yeah. Even though the work has gotten easier, the costs are still going up. Yeah, we have the automated floor sweeper that's already out there. We're deploying that once a week. We ask the airlines to pull back all their stanchions, and we do the downstairs, and it runs pretty much unabated upstairs in the back there because there really isn't much to run into. It's actually out running around when passengers are in place and doesn't seem to bother anyone or cause any problems. We can also drive it. It's just like the ones you see at Walmart or Sam's. You can get on there and drive it. So we have a couple areas where it routinely has trouble. So we can just jump on and operate it for those. But yeah, that's a big time saver, and it keeps the floors a lot cleaner. And going forward, maybe we'll find some other operational. There's savings. There's some commercial, basically Roombas now that vacuum that we might deploy. Rooms like this. That's something we might be able to turn out overnight. We have mapping software, so we can kind of limit them to areas we need where we have carpet to keep somebody from having to vacuum. As you can imagine, with the amount of flooring we have, floor maintenance was becoming a pretty sizable amount per someone's time, especially when they were using the manual floor scrubber. So we're constantly looking for ways to make things quicker and easier, but the cost of manpower is just, as everyone knows, going up. So any other questions there? All right, great. Airport activity exceeded 2019 for the first time in the first quarter of this year. So we're kind of back to recovered. As we look into second quarter, we're going to have some extra seats thanks to the upgauging of United. As you may recall, United is bringing an all Airbus fleet coming in June. They'll have a 319 on the overnight and morning flight, a 320 in the afternoon, which adds like another 15 seats to the 319. And then the Saturday Chicago flight is now on Airbus also. That's a recent change. They just made that the last couple of weeks. So they'll have an all Airbus fleet, which is pretty exciting. It's quite an increase in the number of seats. So we're anxious to see that. Delta's staying with the 3-a-day Salt Lake on the 76-seater, which is still more Salt Lake seats than we normally would have, because it used to be a 50. So now we'll have quite a few more seats there, and then Minneapolis is also a 76-seat. Alaska's staying with the 176 seat flight. They can't quite pull off the second flight. They're really looking to grow next year is what the CEO is saying, so we're hopeful we'll see that other flight back. And then Allegiant's cutting back their schedule as they have the last few years in the summertime, so we'll see less flights from them. But we have more seats overall in the summer, so we're expecting we should get through summer. Through the second quarter, we still an increase over 2019. So
Do you ever get information on advanced bookings from airlines?
Only if I ask. So typically I don't get a lot of information. Sometimes I'll ask the counters down there, hey, how are advanced bookings looking? Everything I've seen so far, I don't know, Barbie, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, everything seems to be pretty solid.
I've just been reading that everything's selling out for the summer, I don't know.
Reading what?
I've just been reading in the media that nationwide, that summer seats are being sold out quickly. A lot of people are gonna be traveling and airlines are gonna be over capacity this summer.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing too. Everything's going up pretty quickly. Just, I've seen, and I've taken just in the last month.
So that's really positive. I mean, if we have a solid summer this year, it'd be nice to be over 2019 and kind of progressing back towards record highs. And if you don't know, our record years were back in 14, 15. That's when we had Frontier, those couple of years flying daily at one point. And so we're still kind of chasing some of that. In addition, the Canadian dollar was at par then. And so Allegiant was just doing tremendous business, particularly in the springtime. They were flying practically daily, full of Canadians. And so ideally, we'll start to see ourselves back on that track in maybe 24. I do expect we'll have some good potential route gains in 24. And on that subject, we're signed up for Jumpstart in June. I'll be heading over to Milwaukee to meet with the airlines. That's our first big annual conference of the year for the airline route planners. We've already gotten meetings accepted from American, Breeze, Allegiant, Alaska, and Sun Country. Hopefully United will add in at the last minute. Delta, I don't think is on there yet either. Hopefully they'll be able to commit a planner, and we'll get to see them there. If not, we'll be looking to get a call with them in that same time frame to kind of talk about next year. We're also beginning to talk to DOT about amending our grant. We'd like to amend that grant to be either Dallas service or California service. So there is, the front of that report talks about California extensively, so a lot of the research is already in there. So we think it might be as easy as just an administrative change to allow us to pursue a California route with that SCASB grant we received last August. We'd like to have that in our pocket at the June meetings, so as we talk to the airlines, we can be talking about potential for a California route alongside talking about a Dallas route. Construction, the Bozeman belts are starting to show up. On the agenda today, we have a thank you letter for the airport authority down there for allowing us to have those bag belts, which we'll talk about a little later. Our crews are getting ready to set up a temporary bag belt system. We've taken some of the old 50-year-old belts and kind of meatloafed them together down there into a little bit of an assembly line alongside the new airline back wall. I suspect that back wall will be drywalled probably in the next week or two.
Should be in a week, yeah.
Yeah, and so once that back wall is in place, we'll look to place those new belts back there so that Delta has, if you go down there and look right now, they have a dust wall or construction wall right next to their counter, which has a door in it. They can go in that door and they're basically at the end of that new belt. And then Alaska and Allegiant would have a door kind of behind them, so they could go in there and put bags on that belt to feed into the baggage system. The belts that are showing up now from Bozeman are the belts that would lead out of the machine, out of the two machines, I should say, and back to the area where the airlines can pick them up. So here shortly, we'll be able to start the back end of the baggage belt program, so that the output belts will be in place, so as the bags are screened, the airlines can drive around and pick those up. So that presumably could be in place by summer, so that's pretty exciting. The belts that'll lead from the airline ticket counter to the machines won't be available until mid-June, and then we'll be setting those in place, and then our new airline take-back belts behind the counters won't be available until September. The group did get together last week in a couple of emails and make a selection of a vendor. Dick Anderson had solicited about 4 proposals from bag belt companies. We should be well within our budget, about $1 million, to get that bag system in place, which will include 2 new take-back belts. The take-back belts, which are behind the airline ticket counter, those will be the portion of the system that we see as permanent. We don't have any plans in place that would remove those, so we wanted to buy new belts in there that will last us a good 20 years. The equipment that's going behind the counter, eventually, at some point in the next 10 or 15 years, we expect, in fact, I was just talking to TSA about it down there a few minutes ago, we expect we'll receive different machinery for the bag screening component. It'll probably be what's called a mid-size machine, and at that point, the TSA would probably replace those belts back in there with whatever would feed that new machine. So we envision that probably won't stay in place much longer than 10 years, maybe 15, but at that point we expect we'll have outgrown that kind of setup in the back. So having used belts is a real boost forward for us because we're not spending millions of dollars to put belts in place that we would eventually get rid of. Instead, Bozeman folks have been generous enough to give us their old belts. Let's see, Airport Jumpstart. The Alaska and the Legion offices are under construction right now, and a little bit of the United's future space. I expect those offices will start being drywalled in the next week or so. So we'll probably move them into some of their new office space in the first part of June, so they can get out of the little office that's over kind of underneath us right here, and make that available if we need it for United. And so they'll be into their new spaces. The plan will be to move their ticket counters forward about 10 or 15 feet from where they are right now. They sit half and half on existing terrazzo and on concrete floor. That entire area from where the ticket counter is now to about 30 feet back needs to go to terrazzo. And so by moving it forward 10 feet, we'll be able to open up the space all the way from the new floor that was completed by Delta all the way across to where United is. That new terrazzo flooring can go in over the summer. Get that in place, and then shortly after that, we'll be moving United either to some temporary counters so we can do their terrazzo, or potentially move their counter forward 10 feet too, so we can work behind them. So things are coming together pretty quickly. We're hopeful that we can wrap this program up by fall and get this done before the holidays, and have our brand new ticketing area. We did meet in the last month with the design team on the canopy. We've got, I think, most of the major design elements down, made some decisions on materials and how that will look, signage, that kind of thing. That project should be in about 2-3 weeks, or how close to bid are we?
They're not
In
gonna
May?
have everything done till June. So
Oh, okay.
they're pushing it out a little bit.
Hopefully we'll find a contractor by June.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we got to get that project into bid so we can get somebody working on that. That'll be a really nice project, really dress up the front of the building. I'm very excited about that. Ramp construction will probably restart by the time we meet again. We suspect in late May that project will get up and running, and hopefully be completed around July. Rod, is that kind of the
Yeah, I think it's 60 days.
60 days. So we'll have that in place, be ready for next winter, which is pretty exciting. We met today with the Mang folks. We're a finalist for the C-130J, so the selection team's in town. It sounds like they're down to a list of finalists. About half of those finalists will get C-130Js. It sounds like Casey's about half will get C-130Js. So we're real hopeful. It was a good meeting today. I think sounds like everything is the table's set for that. Whenever we can get in the queue, we'll be in pretty good shape to get them. So positive development there. And then lastly, it looks as though we'll have somewhere between, I'd say, 4 and 6 hangars under construction this summer. We've completed leases on 5. The 6th leasee is in the queue. We'll sign any day now on one of the larger 80x80s. So that's really positive. We're working with that hangar developer to look at how we would extend utilities into that area for his hangar. We'll be building the taxiways, taxi lanes, I should say. We've got one bid, which we'll talk about a little later. Hopefully this summer we'll get that completed and have that area really ready to develop. About half the hangar pads, not quite half, but probably got about another dozen more hangar pads yet to go after we get this initial slot of 6 in. But we'll be well on our way to developing that area out, and here pretty quickly, we probably should start looking at some planning charrettes for developing across behind Eagle Jet with some future hangar development in that area. So utilizing that taxi lane we built last year and opening up probably another 15 acres over that way for additional hangar development too. So exciting to see those things going on. You probably saw in the weekly report the condo building goes into production next week. So they'll be starting to build those metal panels for the first 3 units. We're very close coming down to the wire with our one potential tenant. They're working with their lender. We, in the same time frame, want to put in a change order to go to 6 units. So we've told them, we really need to get that answer in the next few days, so we can get that 6-unit building built if they're ready to go. So hopefully in the next week or two, we'll find out on that, and whether or not we're going to be working with that tenant. Let's see, mention it. Hangar development, I think that's all I've got.
How about the icing pads?
Oh, that's the ramp expansion.
Oh,
Yeah, the de-icing pad, that was started at the end of May.
Okay.
Should be about
They're in the same
90 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fog seal still.
Fog seal, we've pulled off a fog seal for the year. We're not gonna do it this year. And a couple reasons. The funding's getting tight with everything else we're trying to get done. But then also we're a finalist for some new experimental treatments that we might be able to deploy on that taxi lane. On the taxiway A. The runway fog seal we did, was that 2 years ago, Rod?
Yeah,
3
I
years
think
ago?
2 or 3.
2 or 3 years ago, that almost immediately came off. We're not real happy with how well that adhered. And I think part of the reason for that is we kind of had a cold spell, an early cold spell not too long after that, but really we're not sure we're getting the value for the money out of that last fog seal. And so we'd like to try a few of these new products that are being experimented with to see if any of those might be a good choice for us going forward. And that, if we can get in with this vendor, that would be free. And so we're thinking to try that and really see if we get any benefit out of it. We're right on the front edge of when that needs to be fog sealed anyway. Generally, we can kind of go another 3 or 4 years. But if we could get in this test program to try some of that new material, it might really benefit us. And something that would work a little better in this climate. Anything else you want to add with that, Rod?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
And Steve spent some time out there a few weeks ago kind of inventorying the conditions, and I mean, I think for the most part, it's in really good shape. We do need some crack seal kind of up around, close to Home and Aviation up in that area. There's some area of that taxi lane which wasn't reconstructed, right, during the taxiway project years ago?
No, there's a couple sections in between Alpha 7 and down, or Alpha 1 down to Alpha 2, and then down by Alpha 7 to Alpha 6 is where there's additional cracking down there. That wasn't reconstructed either, so those were really kind of the two areas. And then right where Alpha 2, the high speeds come off Alpha 2 and Alpha 3, that big intersection was never reconstructed either. And that's where the most significant damage is, but we also have DFA talk to us about doing something with those high speeds in the future, so we don't want to touch those until we get direction.
They want to reconstruct that area. I think we've mentioned it to the board before. The high-speed taxi lanes are up there. These two here, you can kind of see they're at a 45-degree angle. They lead over to a couple of ramp areas, and the FAA has denoted those as areas of concern because somebody could accidentally think they were getting onto a taxi lane and end up on the runway. They would really like to replace these with 90-degree taxi lanes. I mean, I frankly think, you know, in order to do that, you'd be tearing out all of this pavement, you'd be reconstructing large parts of A, because you can see how wide that is in those areas. I mean, it's probably a $40 million program, which in my opinion is not really useful. We've never had an incidental access to the runway in those areas, but that is the design criteria FAA has now, and so we've kind of got it out there in our CIP about 3 or 4 or 5 years out, and the FAA is wanting to see that march forward year by year, getting closer. So we're hoping that maybe some of that design guidance might change, or there would be maybe a little bit more economic approach to that program, because I mean, even our portion of that's going to be a huge amount of money, you know, for not a lot of operational benefit. And then if you look at the wear and tear on a runway for a 90 versus a 45, it means you're on the brakes harder, your dwell time is higher. All of those things are bad for the pavement. Frankly, bad for safety. The longer you're on that runway, the more chance someone lands on you. And so, you know, our preference would be to keep high speeds in that area, but that'll be a tough discussion with the FAA. So,
When did that change from high-speed exits to perpendicular?
they kind of came up with the idea of direct to ramp. I'd say that's probably 5 years ago.
It's not been that long ago.
Yeah, maybe, was it, I think it was before pandemic for sure.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But yeah, it's not so much they don't like high speeds as they don't like direct access from a ramp to a runway. So that somebody can kind of get tunnel vision and think, you know, oh, I'm gonna go down this taxiway to get to where I'm going and end up on a runway. Now, we've got painted signs, we've got wigwags, we've got, you know, everything short of a clown with balloons out there to keep somebody from doing that. But it is still happening at airports every year, and so the safety teams, I mean, this is kind of the different components of the FAA, the safety teams are pushing that forward as a need within FAA.
Even with a single main runway? I could see.
Intersecting, well, they really hate intersecting runways now too. Yeah, I agree, and we'll continue to pressure FAA on the need for that program. And but if we are going to reconstruct that whole area, that, you know, all of that area or most of that area Steve's talking about where there is damage will need to be reconstructed for that program. So it you know,
Where's the damage?
Steve, do you want to kind of show the older? And I don't know why taxiway A wasn't done full length when it was reconstructed. That was just before my time.
Well, it was overlaid in certain areas and reconstructed in other areas. And that section Steve's talking about there by Alpha 2, that was part of the 2006 runway construction project where
That makes sense.
they overlaid that area. And then when they came back and did Alpha a few years later, they didn't touch it again. But
Yes.
Alpha has a new, well, 2010-ish, 2009 is when it was overlaid and reconstructed in areas.
And due to keeping the runways open and access for commercial service, this couldn't be reconstructed in 06. We displaced the threshold, but this area right here couldn't be reconstructed. We did reconstruct a part of this corner, but there's substantial rutting, there's alligator cracking, and this wouldn't be just an old mill and an overlay area, because from what I can tell in my experience, there's base course and sub-base course that needs to be redone, so.
I mean, the good news is, once we have the de-icing pad, that's gonna make it easier to circulate if we have to close one of the Romeos. You know, and so, if we are gonna have to, the FAA is gonna force us to reconstruct, that'll pick up that area at the same time. At the same time, a fog seal in that area isn't gonna do any good, because once the cracks are below the very surface of that asphalt, the fog seal doesn't glue anything together enough. So there would have to be quite a bit of sealant in that area probably applied in order to get any kind of cohesion and prevent that water infiltration. But yeah, for right now, we're gonna move the fog seal into a future year, see if we can get one of those programs with one of the vendors and get a test section put out on our runway, or our taxiway, so we can try out some of the material.
Can I ask a quick, kind of unrelated pilot question? Is there a reason we've never had the ILS for runway 21?
For the other end,
Yeah, precision approach on that.
because they're very hard to get.
Yeah.
You know, from the FAA. In fact, the FAA's current line is, I think, unless they've changed it, they won't do any new ILSs. Yeah.
And then ILS used to be on 3.5
3.5.
until about the 80s, early 80s.
Yeah.
And then they put it on 3 because that favored the
Prevailing wind.
north wind a little bit more, but
One day, ideally, everything will migrate to GPS. You know, but of course, we've all been saying that my entire career. I was a very young man once when I presented on that at FAA.
You count on free flight, too.
Yeah, and so, have you guys heard, have they deployed any new ILSs recently that you're aware
The
of?
most recent one was actually Pullman. You
Oh,
know, the new runway.
The new runway
at
there,
Pullman.
so they did, that was like 2 years
So
ago.
they've changed it a little bit to where they are still allowing ILSs to be improved and installed, but not, I mean, it's pretty few and far between. It's gotta be a huge justification, just because they're relying on GPS and LPV approaches to that, to get you to the same minimums that a typical
Yeah.
Yeah, nowadays.
ILS will.
units, so.
As we say, LPV's replacing a lot of the.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they would prefer, you know, you can get LPVs down to 200.5, and they prefer doing that just because of the maintenance on the ILS equipment.
And at least from a commercial standpoint, now that we're done with the CRJs, you know, the newer planes have that capability.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, one of the least technologically advanced airplanes we had serving here was the CRJ 200. So.
I think they're mandating that into a lot of the aircraft anymore as well.
Oh, I'm sure. I would hope. I mean, I don't know how we'll ever get beyond 1950s technology if we don't.
But they backed off a little bit on ground-based equipment and actually are with DORs and so forth and keeping them within the mountains. Because I think they are a little nervous of if our GPS got jammed, did we lose everything?
Solar flare or anything, really.
So I think you'll still see the old ground-based remain, especially in the mountains.
Any other questions there? That's all I have.
Cool. Can you talk about the cash reserves, anything you want to talk about there?
We continue to draw down. Shailene, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we're continuing to draw down. We have a few AIP things we're gonna have to resubmit, but, and our sweep account did get built, so the other day I logged into the bank account and said we had $10,000 in the checking and I about had a heart attack, but our sweep account switched over and I was like, what? So, that's put together, but we are going to, our Wells Fargo managed investments aren't really doing us any good, so we're gonna pull them out actually and put them at STIP. So a little bit more liquid and available for us. But other than that, it looks good. Just getting lower, spending money.
And I don't know if you guys, have you heard anything about grant availability? I mean, we're still expecting about $1 million grant to come through on the terminal. It was supposed to be last year, but here it is April. I don't know if.
Yeah, just the sheer number of grants, they're behind. With this bill money that's rolled out, they went from like 60 grants a year to 180, so they're just a little behind on everything.
So the grand idea of shuffling out more money so we can get more things done has turned into getting, you know, less money slower. Yay.
But it's a weekly conversation with our FAA guys, so they're trying
I did hear June on bill money, but.
Well, that's good, you know, because we are going to approach a time when we can't, I mean, we're going to begin paying money in July, or probably a little sooner than that for the apron project, most of which, you know, is going to be grant funded eventually, but there's still some pretty big bills that come out of that we've got to, you know, match. And then on top of that, as we start to get canopy bills and projects for this upcoming year, if those grants are slow, like the grant for the ticketing lobby, our cash flow will be challenged to continue to front that money while we await reimbursement. Yeah, I suspect by the time we get to July, we're gonna be in pretty dire need of, you know, getting some of those funds that we're supposed to be getting.
How's the rate on STIP, how's the rate determined on STIP again?
That's the state's investment fund. It's short-term treasuries, so whatever they're getting on those short-term treasuries is what, you know, we all get. And it's one of the, I think most of the treasuries in there are under 3 months, if I'm not mistaken. They might have something longer than that right now. Have you looked at their
I
portfolio?
haven't dug into the portfolio.
And so, I mean, the yields actually right now are pretty good, but it's done, traditionally, it's done very well for us. There was one quarter in there where I remember we had a negative, which was really surprising years ago. But yeah, it's the state's short-term portfolio. Any of the cities and counties and all the other municipal agencies can invest in that. And the nice thing about it is we can get our money back within
Like 3 days.
3 days. So
Pretty liquid.
it's pretty liquid.
So if rates go back down at some point, we'll see that
It'll
reflect quickly
go with
within
it.
a couple month period.
Yeah, but we also expect we'll have some major draws here in the next few months. As you know, we've got to buy that baggage system, which is, you know, $750,000 coming out. We've got the warehouse building, which is going to be either 1.3 million or 2.2 million coming out. So there's a couple of big slugs that are going to be hitting us here pretty quick. So, moving into that STIP makes sense because we can get it a lot faster than get the Wells Fargo stuff out.
Anything else before we move on? All right, item number 1, capital project access road phase 3 design.
Yes, with the state moving ahead with the 30% design on the, what you call it, the roundabouts and new lane coming up the hill, we want to kind of meet that in the same design horizon and get out there and do some planning for that third phase of the roadway development. Ideally, our cash flow will recover well enough by next year that we can take on the local share of this project, which we do anticipate $500,000 to $600,000 of ineligible costs in this program. And so we want to get design underway so we can interact with that project that the MDT is doing. I think the design cost is about $230,000. Normally our projects are 90% eligible, but because of the high ineligible portion of this project, we anticipate that only about $130,000 worth of it's going to be eligible, and then $100,000 of local match for the ineligible portions, plus our 10% match on the overall project. So we'd like permission to spend up to $230,000 in the design of the Phase 3 roadway program.
Seems like we've been talking about this Avenue B thing for years.
We have, and as we said last month, I mean, there's been a lot of things that have kind of played into that. Getting Love's in had a big component to it because they bought the right-of-way that we need to use to get people for the alternative route from Airport Avenue B. They built the road last year, or a year and a half ago, that will connect the current residents back there with the new Love's entrance there. That allows us to consolidate everything into one intersection. So until we got that whole piece done, there really wasn't much we could do to advance that program. We did want to get it out as soon as possible, to out in the public that we wanted to close Airport Avenue B, just so everyone's informed and has time to think about it and no one's surprised. And as the Swansons were planning their property about 4 years ago, and since they've sold off pieces of it, we wanted to talk to them about that so they were aware of it. The time is getting close though, where we do need to engage and talk about that Airport Avenue B. It would be a good benefit to us to get that closed and consolidate those intersections.
Looked like last week they were drilling for soil samples.
Yep, doing some core drills. I noticed that too. They're replacing that overpass. That's one element of that program. So, that I'm sure they're looking for footings and locations for all that out there now. So, it's a big program, and I think replacing the overpass isn't a bad idea, but retaining the same basic geometry is the problem. One lane in either direction doesn't really allow for any expansion. There will be a snow lane in there and a sidewalk. It desperately needs a sidewalk. If you've ever seen people get out of the jail, it's it's like a game of Frogger trying to get across there. But I mean, it'll be better. It just won't be ideal. I think the lane coming up the hill will be a big advantage because then we'll have a right that basically is unmolested the entire way up and go right into the airport without getting hung up in that left traffic. If you've ever been stuck on an overpass, it's generally the left or the straight that kind of backs up into where it's single lane and then nobody can go anywhere. Getting that traffic out of there so it's minimized just to the left and straight will be a big advantage.
You get ice, I was on there, ice and it all got stopped. I can't remember, it was about a year ago, it was all iced up, and there was some truck
People
up
get
front
stuck
that
on
couldn't
it.
move,
Yep.
and everybody was stuck.
I got stuck on it one day. It was a very nice guardsman that came and gave me a little shove and that got me going, but yeah. It's slick, it's steep. It seems like the last place in the world you want to give, double and triple trucks the right of way, because they just can't go any faster. They're gonna come into that intersection at 2 miles an hour if they're lucky, and they're gonna have the right of way to back up everything coming out of here, but that's the design we've got.
So we can proceed with this regardless of what DOT decides to do.
Yeah, we need to marry into whatever, we don't know exactly how they're going to accomplish that roundabout. They are gonna need a lot of fill, because if you look, that road is on the high point now, and the sidewalls are like 20 feet. So they're gonna have to import, I know where they can get some cheap dirt. We're always looking to get rid of dirt. You know, and so, you know, we've got a massive roundabout that's gonna have to go in there. We would like to preserve the ability to come off right of that without stopping, which is one of the things we wanna do in our project, is add a right, so that traffic trying to get from here over to our snow shed and to the development along the frontage road would be able to continue in that intersection without getting into the roundabout. I don't know how practical that is, because they're already gonna be taking Mang right away, most likely. They're gonna wanna move into where that Sabre sits today in order to get the width they need for the roundabout. So, but we definitely wanna be involved in the design of that, so that our road can kind of marry into that, because their ownership comes all the way into and beyond that intersection by about 100 feet or so around towards Love's.
So I guess the real question is there a possibility that we do this and then have to redo it when DOT comes in and starts?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, once, you know, because we are making the effort to coordinate with their design, if they end up with an alignment that doesn't match ours, I would assume they would fix that. You know, so they would come into our alignment and make corrections that they need to be made to the traffic flows. We're definitely making the effort to coordinate with what they're doing, and, you know, we definitely want it to work. Now, if they get in there and it's not buildable for some reason, you know, like I said, I think they would, you know, correct their design to marry up with ours.
Any other questions or comments on that?
We've received their preliminary layout too, so we tied in based on our scope and for this project, was all based on tying into that design as it sits, so. I've already seen this.
All right, can I get a motion to authorize to proceed with the design of the access road phase 3 design with a budget amount not to exceed $230,000?
I'll make that motion.
Got a motion? Any additional comments? All right, can I get a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye and nay. The ayes have it. All right, item number 2, Southwest General Aviation Taxi Lanes.
Yeah, so we did bid the project for the taxi lanes this summer, and we've got one bid. The bid totals about $433,000. That's just the hard construction bid. We'll have some CM costs in there, but we think we're well under the approved budget, which was $640. So we think we've got a compliant bid. We didn't see any problems with the bid in terms of its responsiveness. There were a few questions that we've since had answered about mobilization costs and a few other things that didn't seem like they were categorized correctly. But it looks like we've got a bid that we can act on, and so we'd like to accept that bid and move forward with the program.
So when you say accept the bid, looking at the scenarios that were laid out, which scenario basically are you talking about?
We're going to accept all the entire schedules. We've got, we broke things out in the event we wouldn't have enough money, so that we had some ways to cut the program back. But it looks like we have enough funds to implement the entire bid, so we'd like to accept the entirety, and we would plan to move ahead with all schedules.
Have you guys seen this discrepancy? It seems like there is a significant discrepancy on some of these costs between the engineer's estimates and the contractors.
Well, the mobilization was an interesting one. Typically, we don't accept anything over 10% of the entire project. This one was at 640% of the project, what it should have been. And then upon breaking it down, because we basically rebid CH2's package from the previous design, and we didn't want to change any of that design. There was some costs that had to be put in the mobilization to tie into that existing project that was constructed, and that's where they put it. So after reviewing their breakout of the mobilization, all of the costs made sense, appeared reasonable, and were justifiable costs.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have opened any other paving bids this year yet or not, but I mean, it is a little higher than the engineer's estimate, but in total, but, that's not uncommon for our projects. We tend to last, gosh, I can't, Rod, you remember the last time we had a project that came in at engineer's estimate?
Oh, yeah, I don't know if we have.
It's been years.
Yeah.
It's definitely all over the board this year. I mean, finding contractors is difficult because they're struggling finding staff. So we have seen an increase in prices, definitely
And
on
oil.
asphalt and road.
And oil's fluctuating
And oil's-
pretty wildly right now. It seems to be untethered.
And diesel is up there
Yep.
over what it was.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Previous
Too many cookies.
All right, with no other questions or comments from the board, can I have a motion to authorize to accept the United Materials bid as presented?
I'll make a motion.
I have a motion
I'll do a second.
and a second. Any additional comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Nay. The ayes have it. Item number 3, access control design and implementation selection.
Yeah, as the board's aware, we published a design and build RFP a few months ago for the new access control system. Shouldn't say new, our first access control system. What this system will do is, currently today, this key here unlocks pretty much everything. And that's how we're kind of running our security is through a key inventory, and that's fairly inefficient. Obviously, if someone quits, we have to rekey quite a few locks, gets fairly expensive. And so in conjunction with our discussions with TSA, they would really like us to move forward with an access control system. We now have fiber into the building, which allows us to have more bandwidth for cameras and that type of thing throughout the building. The current ticketing project is driving fiber out to the gate areas. We've got a central IT room now, where we really didn't have any central IT structures or infrastructure prior to this. Now we'll have kind of a central point at which we can reach out to those gates with fiber. We can get to the ticket counters with fiber, which more or less means we can get to all the sided doors with fiber. And so the access control system will be adding a badge and pin pad system at any entrances into the, what we call the secure identification area, side area. You'll have to badge in, put a pin in, that'll open the door. To get back out of there, you'll just need the badge. The main reason we're doing that is if Joe Public finds a badge laying on the floor, we don't want to give him access to anything. You need to have a pin with that in order to effectuate entrance in. To get back out, we care less about, we want to get people out as expeditiously as possible, but we do want to have an inventory of who went in and out of doors. So by badging out, that tells us immediately if we have an incident, who's on the field. Also tells us, this person went in, what were they doing, where did they go, those types of things. So that access control system will control the access to these doors. In order to control the access, we have to add new locks, because the current key locks obviously won't work. So we're going to be primarily going with a magnetic hinge system. That'll go out and put those magnets on the hinge so that door stays locked. And in the event of a power failure, we're on generator backup. Our intent would be to put a small GPU throughout to kind of power that until the generator gets it, and then powers those doors through the power outage. And so this system will be backed up with a CCTV system so we can actually see who went in and out of doors at the same time, or if we have an incident at a door, we'll be able to see what's going on with our police. They'll have be able to pull that up on their mobile phone. So a pretty robust system. We're pretty excited to be moving in that direction. It'll improve our security. In particular, I hate the way our bag doors are right now. They're just manual. So every time somebody opens one of those bag doors and puts the bags through, they gotta remember they gotta come back and close that. Going forward with the access control system, that'll all be automated. So you'll badge to start the bag belt running, badge pin to start the bag belt running, and then once it'll either time out, after a period of time, that'll have an automatic shutdown, or you'll badge it back off to close it. We're sure that door gets shut. And so pretty exciting to be moving that direction. We did get 4 responses to the RFP. The selection committee interviewed 3 companies last week and made a selection based on the proposals and on the interviews. The unanimous selection of the board was FICO. FICO is already managing a few of the systems here at the airport, the air handler, that type of thing. They're here in town. They have a local group that can handle call-outs on this system, installation on this system, and so we would ask the board to accept the bids as presented here, and we would like to proceed with the contract with FICO for design and implementation.
Any comments from that?
Yeah, I said on the interviews, they were pretty extensive. All 3 could do the job. 2 of them, as you can see, were a lot more expensive. And Bertie obviously has the most experience. They've done a lot of airports, but they're also very high cost. And so FICO was the obvious selection and they're local too, so that's an added advantage.
Yeah, looks like a no-brainer on paper at least.
How do you go from 1.2 million to $300,000? I mean, is it the types of camera, the types of technology, more equipment? Kind of give me that disparity, what,
Bertie,
why
it
is
was
it
just
different?
the amount of overhead they had. I mean, the amount of people that they would have involved in this project, I don't know, 4 times the amount of FICO.
And they were only at 700,000.
Yeah.
Whereas Convergent was at 1.
Like Virgin, I don't know,
I think sometimes companies put in, a proposal and they may not expect that they might get it. So they put a fairly, healthy number on it. If they get it, it's great, but, it may not, it may be, out of the service area or something like that where they normally would work. So they price it accordingly, and if they, they get it, they get it. And so, it's hard to say all that went into that. I think, companies have different approaches too. I mean, certainly I think some of these higher priced systems might be a much more robust system. They're often working with a much bigger airport that needs a lot more duplicate structure, needs more expandability, has longer distances. I mean, I think it's hard for a lot of these companies that work with, big Florida airports, for example, to understand how close our gates are to our IT room and how close the sided doors are to the IT room. We're just very concise, small, and we don't plan to do a huge rollout. We want to minimize the number of cameras because we only have one guy to watch cameras. If one guy's watching 30 cameras, it's not very effective. But if we can get that down to a minimum, that's really what we want. And so I think part of it is just a scale and scope type of thing. We're rolling out a very small system, and I think FICO is used to that, and they're doing systems here in town for medical clinics or Turo, for example. Probably Toro might even be a bigger system than we have, depending on what they're keeping people in and out of. Toro's the new medical school.
Is it 37,000 or so less a year? Is that, it says average annual maintenance costs contract first 5 years, is that 40,848 a year compared to 4,700 a year?
Well, so, no, these are at the actual amount. So for instance, I know one of the vendors planned to hire someone here, so they'd be their first employee in our community, and so they're burdening that with the entirety of one employee, whereas FICO is already up here, as they pointed out, and they're already doing, so this for them would just be another call out to the airport. They would be coming out here to manage, our air handling system and some ID, some access ID stuff. So that's the difference there, is they don't have any travel costs really. They're really looking to just have, additional costs through that program. So this is the annual cost, average annual cost. Several of them it's flat, a couple of them it escalated, so we just averaged the 5 years. Most of them it's free the first year. I think one of them it's free the second year. So we just piled everything in and divided by 5 to come up with what the average proposed annual was.
and Bertie was gonna hire someone, I think ASIG and Convergent were gonna outsource it. So FICO's doing it in-house, so that's a huge savings right there.
Well, the initial cost alone the average cost in general is significant,
And that's one of the reasons we do the interviews. We really wanted to see if someone could demonstrate they were providing value in a different way. Maybe their system did things that would minimize our costs in other areas. And so we really wanted to give everyone the opportunity to come in and present that. And we, after those interviews, everyone still felt comfortable the best value, because this is a value selection, was FICO.
I'm all about keeping it local. And actually, I had some pretty experienced folks on their team, so I was impressed. A couple of them were ex-Air Force guys that worked in security and were very knowledgeable. One had been in an IG out the base in security, so some pretty good expertise there.
Was there anything that Birdie had that was would have been a nice to have, but not nice enough?
Oh, yeah.
I think their knowledge of airports in the interview was really unparalleled. You know, they do more than just access control, they do all kinds of systems, you know, but we don't have all kinds of systems.
Yeah, they
You know,
could
we
have
don't have-
outfitted us like LA International, they could
Yeah,
have
we
done
don't have-
perimeter security.
Right,
all
people
kinds of stuff.
movers, you know, all that type of proximity, you know, for, you know, elevator controls, on and off, that kind of thing. You know, so you're not burning electricity, and they could do all that stuff, but we just don't have that complicated of an operation yet. Maybe one day we would, you know, and obviously these systems don't last forever, you know, so, you know, we definitely keep them in mind if, you know, at some point we build a new building, it would be good to have somebody, you know, with that much experience involved.
Yeah, I mean, it was obvious with them, we were sort of a size mismatch, because I think their staff was set up for a large airport, and that's why when they proposed to us, they had such a huge staff in the office to support the effort. And, I mean, they did have a very nice system to propose. But also, the other three companies live in high-cost areas, so their in-house salaries are a lot more, probably double than what they are here. So, you know, people cost was the biggest cost in these systems, everything else is pretty standard.
Well, the other thing too is, you know, span of control is an issue. You know, Colorado Springs literally has a person that stays in the control room and monitors screens, and at night they answer the phone, you know, but their scope is really to stay in that room, you know, kind of like the, you know, that TV show 24 when they're watching the cameras and doing all the stuff. You know, we had one of those people. And then you had officers that never went in that room, that were out. You know, here, you know, we only have one. You know, and they've got to be out in the checkpoint, they've got to be, you know, looking at the screens from time to time. They've got to answer the calls when someone has, you know, gotten their tie stuck in our pay machine at the, you know, at the toll plaza. It's all the same guy. And so, you know, if we had a dedicated staffing that we wanted to know more about what's going on in our operation, you know, then that would make some sense. You know, but, you know, really we don't. You know, we need to control the doors, we need quick answers about who did what, we need to be able to track down who might have propped a door. You know, we can do that with the system that's being proposed, but you know, we don't need the other capabilities, we don't have time to use them all.
Any other comments? Perfect. Can I get a motion to recommend entering into a contract with FICO for the design and implementation of the access control and ID management system?
I'll make a motion.
Got a motion? Any additional comments? Can I get a second?
A second.
Got a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye and nay. And the ayes have it.
One other thing I'll note on here, as we've progressed from the time we put the RFP together, this winter in particular being a little warmer and wetter, we've found some problems in, for instance, our loading bridge locking systems that we currently have out there. We have cipher locks, they're not working particularly well. It's likely we're gonna come back to the board with a pretty quick phase 2 to expand this. We didn't wanna do that in the midst of a proposal because we want everybody bidding on the same thing. But now that we're kind of through that, as we work with this consultant, I think we'll expand the scope of this somewhat to lock the doors. As we've been talking to some of these vendors, it's been a two-way exchange, and you know, we really feel pretty confident that one of the least expensive and more weather-resistant locking mechanisms would be these hinge locks that we could potentially put out there in the loading bridges, which don't get heated at all. You know, and that would make a better system for getting in and out of those loading bridges and securing them than what we're using. Those cipher locks in some cases are, you know, $500, $600, $700, $800 anyway. It's not that much more expensive to go to a badge system that would still provide security and be a little more rugged in the weather. than what we're already doing. And so I think we'll probably come back to the board the next few months, maybe even not until August, and put a second phase together to get some of these doors that we hadn't initially planned to do, but there's an operational benefit to them.
Item 4, thank you letter to Gallatin Airport Authority Board.
Yes, as we mentioned last week, the Gallatin Airport Authority did agree to give us some bag belts. That's several $1 million worth of savings for us. We think those are going to be a tremendous boost forward in this project. We had hoped we'd find an inexpensive solution. If you don't know the lineage of that, what happened was about 18 months ago, the TSA started an OSHA audit that they were having some injuries because the United belt back there is fairly low, and they were having to load bags onto a cart it over to the Delta area and scan them and then cart the bags back. It's an incredibly inefficient operation. United now is our largest carrier. When those two CT-80s were sited many years ago, United was one of our smallest carriers. So the decision was made to put the two CT-80s behind, one behind Allegiant and Alaska, which together is a lot of bag volume, and then one behind Delta, who was our largest carrier. And so United never had a bag belt system. They had a manual technology where the TSA used to scrub the bag with a little swab. They would look at it through an explosive detection device, and then they searched quite a few of the bags. I don't know if you remember traveling out on United years ago. You used to get a little love note in your luggage that said TSA and ruffle through your things. And that's why, is because they had to do that with a lot of the bags that went through United then. As TSA was imploring us to get going on some bag changes, and we had this ARPA and CRISA money, we embarked on the ticketing lobby expansion in hopes that TSA would fund an inline baggage system, as they have done in Missoula and soon Bozeman. We had hoped that they might do one here. They ultimately came back to us last fall and said that we didn't have enough bag volume. We're probably somewhere, assuming we start with kind of Missoula where they got a baggage system, we're probably 30% too low in bag volume to qualify for one of those systems. Nonetheless, the technology will eventually change, and they'll want something different than we have now. We know that's likely in the next 10 years. So we wanted to come up with an economic solution that would increase our capability, our capacity, enable us to bring new airlines in and quickly adjust them into our operation without hauling bags by hand and all that kind of thing. And so the system we have right now is this airline take-back belt that goes back into these Bozeman belts, feeds to the machine, goes out to additional Bozeman belts so the airlines can pick them up. And this donation gets us a long way down the road of automating that process and making it much more efficient. And so I think on behalf of the staff, we'd really like, we've already thanked the airport down there, but I thought it would be a good idea for the authority board to also reach out to their board and thank them for that donation. And so we've drafted this letter. It doesn't have to be this letter, we can do a different one, but wanted to put that before you.
I think the letter looks fine to me. Once you guys would like to see if your name's on there, it doesn't certainly have to be just mine.
We can send them some gift cards.
Since seven dip card, great idea.
As far as Professor, the only suggestion I have in that last sentence in the first paragraph is a donation of baggage system belts rather than bag belts. That's sort of.
Yep. Sure.
It's a formal business letter, so.
Yeah, I guess on that note, my captain is now major.
I'm looking up online.
Oh, congratulations.
Been a couple years now, thank you.
Maybe a field promotion.
Sometimes you get a demotion.
Yeah.
No, I think it was good. I think it's a great idea. I could even reach out and give her all the blood.
All right.
So thank you. You don't need a motion on this?
I think it would be nice, just from a symbolic perspective.
Well, I'll make a motion, we send the letter.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Any other last minute little changes? Since we've got some eyes looking at it. Awesome. Got a motion and a second. All in favor of the letter thanking Gallatin Airport Authority Board, say aye.
Aye.
Aye and nay. The ayes have it. Perfect. Any additional airport authority board comments? Commissioner Thompson? Commissioner Husted?
I just want to thank Rod and his crew for handling the sudden surge of snow we had last Tuesday. And the power went out in the building and all kinds of fun.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun on
You
Wednesday.
guys handled it all well. So, had to come in for the interviews and right in the middle of it, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job.
That was a tough day, they really did do a great job out there.
I was surprised how quickly you guys were out. We were trying to fly that day, and obviously it's not people flying. We were standing there watching the whole operation. You guys were out there right on top of it, so.
That snow was so heavy that our gate arms wouldn't open on the parking lot.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's unusual for Montana.
Yeah, it is.
That heavy of a snow.
And just the amount of sleet, I mean, that's what a problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of moisture in that.
We had more operational impacts. I can remember the power was out, the gate arms wouldn't open, people were stuck every which direction. It was quite a day. And we had 3 companies coming in for interviews.
In California.
Were there any deferred step?
What's that?
Were there any deferred step?
I don't think we had, I think everybody got in and out.
Yeah, I think everybody did. There was, I think Delta had to hold for just a short time, and then when we had that sleet storm, there was a lot of us that was waiting.
Yeah, my son was on a United flight, they said they had one shot, and it just happened to slow down during that window and they were able to get in. Otherwise, they were gonna go to Kalispell, where they usually go.
Any additional public comments? Thank you all for being here. With no further business to come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. Take 5.